So let's try this again. Mrugendra is here. He's hidden on the other camera. There he is. We'll come back. Sorry for the audio screw up, folks. Mrugendra works for Exact Systems, where, let me show this, he is Chief Product Officer. So, loading. There he is in the bottom. Um, as Chief Product Officer. And Mrugendra used to work for me at Amazon back in the day. Then he went off and did a bunch of other stuff. And then he joined Exat as Chief Product Officer. And we've talked to him a couple times about, we're going to switch back to him. We've talked to him a couple times about his challenges coming into a startup and trying to change the culture. And so that's a little bit what he's up to. And so tonight he has a list of questions for me. We're going to catch up on what he's been doing. Still says my name under the window. That is so true, Kristen. I bet I can fix that, though. He doesn't look at all like a Kristen. That is, let me see where that field is, and I will fix that. That is really funny, though. On screen event list. Nope, not that. I wonder how to change his name. How did I mess that up? That's fantastic. You don't mind being a Kristen, though, for the night. I just wonder if
Yeah,
Kristen probably minds. Uh, that's so funny that I've botched that. Oh, where did I put it? Oh, I know how to fix it. So anyway, Mrugendra, while I'm doing this, tell us a little bit about what you did for the last, what you've been doing since we last had you here.
sure. So subsequently, one of the takeaways from the last conversation was to go through the homework I had was to read through the book Switch.
Yep.
I'll be honest that I haven't been able to get through 100% of it, but I did get through more than half of it so far, and I will complete the rest soon enough. Again, like the book itself says, soon is not a time, and some is not a number. But I guess a week in about a week, I should be able to complete that book.
So you
So
obviously read it on a Kindle because you told me when you emailed me, you said you were at exactly 53% of the book, which is
correct,
kind of super super
accurate.
accurate. So what did you get? So you've talked about that, but you also said that you wanted to talk about. I have my notes here, and I'll go back to looking for if I can get rid of Kristen's name in a minute. Um, but it is going to be funny to see you recorded as Kristen the whole time because it'll end up in the VOD that way, and you'll be a really funny looking Kristen. But you also said general updates on how you've been able to incorporate some of the learnings from past sessions. So talk about that for a minute, if you don't mind.
Right. Yeah. So I think the entire thing about a trying to sort of list down and identify who would really be the people who would support me through the change, who are the set of people I can rally on, and then going with them. I actually have a list of people, and one of the big things that I think has been working for me and has allowed me to sort of turn the tides a little bit is uh, the clear message of getting some people who I know can rally with me, and then coaching them or sending them a very clear message that let's focus on the positives and help me spread the positivities of the change on the uh, across the population further down, versus just trying to sort of change and make an assumption that people will see through the positive parts of the change over a period of time. Uh, One of the big things I have been doing since I read the book and since I tried to incorporate some of the feedback and the discussions we have had is identifying those people and then actively asking them and using them to drive the positivity. The second big part, which uh, I think has been working well, or which I've been trying to work well, and that sort of feeds into one of the questions which I sent you, has been around trying to drive a little more transparency than what has been driven in the past, by sharing a little more details around revenues, around where the company is, where we want to go, where, at what point we want to involve investors, so on and so forth. What I'm realizing is that it has helped rally the herd, so called, if I may call it that, right? But it has really helped drive more consensus towards what we are trying to do, where we are trying to go, and uh, get people on board with it.
All right. So in the meantime, I got things fixed while you were buying me time there and giving that story, and I'm glad you were able to rally people and get them on board. And I fixed the Kristen name by just making you bigger and having you cover it up. So now you're the unnamed person, but at least you're not Kristen.
Right.
So it's a good hack. Mrugendra and I worked together a long time in engineering, so we can have a good smile about the need to put in a hack. Meanwhile, I'm glad that seems to have worked for you somewhat, um, which is excellent. While I was hacking, by the way, I also managed to turn your image sideways for a minute. So I fixed that too. But it's a good thing. When you watch the VOD later, if you watch just the first 5 minutes, you can have a lot of fun with how this has gone so far. Meanwhile, let's roll with it. So let's talk about the book Switch. Unless, did you have questions about how stuff is gone? Because I listened to you, but it didn't seem. I don't know if you had any questions. It seems like things are going well. Other than the questions you have, it seems like implementing the lessons from the past has been going well. Is that fair, or was there a question in there I missed?
No, I don't think there was any questions in there. And the book itself is, compared to a lot of other sort of self-help management books, if I may call that as a genre, what I found about this book is that it actually is a lot more practical, in the sense that it just doesn't talk a hell lot of theory and concepts, but it actually gives you some sort of direction and tools on how you can go about doing it. So there are actually ground level tactics: find the feelings, shrink the change, mind the environment, show the path, make it pretty clear and concise, and in terms of what you want to do, how do you rally the herd, so on and so forth. So a lot of it is kind of laid out in a very practical and implementable way, which works a lot better with me than uh, kind of a ton of theory.
Sure. And for those of you who don't know the book Switch, I'm going to take 2 seconds, go over to my schedule, sorry, to my recommended books. So Switch is in my recommended book list, which you can find on www.theeasycoach.com, and then recommended books. If they haven't put it up yet, the mods will also put it in chat. And then here is the book itself, real quick. So the book is one of 4 books I recommend by Chip and Dan Heath. Switch is specifically, you can see the title here, How to Change Things When Change is Hard. And so I'm glad Mrugendra might reasonably be described as a bit of a skeptic on self-help books, I would say, if you want to call that, or advice books. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yes, that is a very fair thing to say.
So the fact that you found some value in it is good. I appreciate that. Um, and meanwhile, by the way, I always encourage chat. Thank you all for being here. I'll stop talking to you for a bit because I wanna talk to Mrugendra about his challenges and what he's learning. But if you have things you want to add to the conversation, please jump in because I relay them to him and we add them to the conversation. Also, if you have advice on things he should be doing. So the main challenge Mrugendra is working on is how to pivot his company. The like meta challenge is how to pivot a healthcare startup that mainly works on training health professionals, right? It delivers training solutions and continuing education and certification. Do I have that right as a summary?
It's kind of like a mini ERP for healthcare
Okay.
schools, form or fashion. We have probably evolved close enough to go there,
Okay.
to call ourselves that at this point in time.
Okay. So an ERP is enterprise resource planning. But for those of you who don't know what an ERP system is, and so an ERP for this space, it is very much around the capabilities and the training of the staff. Is that right? Do I have that part right?
One part of it is about that, and then a lot of the other part is about actually handling the student data, figuring out a lot of their practical or clinical education, and how do you send them to the right clinics, match them to the right uh, clinics and doctors and so on for
Okay.
their practical or hands-on clinical education.
And the big thing Mrugendra is trying to do, and why coaching him is chatting on these things is educational. He has some really hard questions about how to lead a startup team, and Kristen's in a somewhat similar environment, so these are good. So with the book Switch, what's the biggest thing you've taken away or tried from it, like specifically?
I think the early part in the book where he talks about trying to, or rather, they talk about trying to, the fact that bad news is what is much easier to latch onto for most people versus good news. I really found a lot of value in that concept based on uh, typically based on more how Indian work environments work, where a lot of information is more free flow and confidentiality is kind of less common in the culture generally than it would be in a place like North America, which kind of makes it even easier for the bad news to spread and uh, become the main theme. I think that whole concept is what for me was the easiest, quickest, fastest to put to practice, which is what I was telling you about the fact that once I had my key people identified, I have started trying to use them to propagate, not propagate the good part of things and use them to drive what I would term as more positive energy uh, via the, in spite of the changes that are happening versus letting the negative energy simmer.
Okay. So no negative energy is awesome. Um, would you say that you keep talking about changes? Can you say a little bit about change? Like, what are the changes that have happened or that your company is undergoing since we last talked? Just so that I and others have a idea about it.
Sure. So one, a lot of hiring at the apex and the middle of the pyramid to get the ratios and the team structures right. Be a lot more accountability and performance driven work culture, I
Okay.
would say, and see a lot more structure and process than what people have typically been used to, given it was a startup that organically kept on growing.
Okay. So what I'm hearing there, if I can phrase into my own words and see if people agree, um, is you hired some more senior people, you've added some process, and you've started being, I might say more of a hard ass, but more clear expectations of minimum performance. Is that the right summary?
Yeah, that's a fair summary.
Okay. So you told me you wanted to talk about three questions. Um, uh, Kristen, who's more recently read Switch than I, though, asks, she says she's curious if you view scripting the critical moves as your responsibility in goal setting or how he's going about that tactic from the book. Have you seen that tactic called script the critical moves? Have you gotten to that
Yes,
part?
I have.
Uh,
So I think the answer is I started off doing a lot of it, I'm trying now consciously to do a little less of it. And the reason for that change is that, or the reason for that change in psyche is that early on I did not really have the apex of the pyramid in place. And I think once the apex is in place, it sort of becomes micromanagement and prescriptive if I go and script the critical move for every little thing. Obviously, for if you're talking about a goal of growing revenue 3x, 4x, whatever, in the next 12 months, it sort of becomes the CEO's responsibility, and to some extent my responsibility, of scripting the moves for something like that. But beyond that, I think it starts becoming too prescriptive for me to do it once I have my leaders in place.
Absolutely. Um, yeah, leaders, you can't micromanage leaders. You give them goals and direction, and you let them lead. And there's a reason for that. If you're telling them exactly what to do, they will develop what's called learned dependency. What's the TL? Oh, there's a question in chat, but it'll get answered in chat, which is fine. Um, so the learn dependency basically means I learn, go to Mrugendra, he's the oracle. He always tells me what to do. So why bother thinking for myself? Just go ask him what he wants me to do. And you can't scale that way. As a leader, you can't scale if what you're doing is just responding to whatever other people tell you to do. And you get into just needing to tell everyone things, and then their answer, if something doesn't go right, is you didn't tell me or you told me the wrong thing. So that doesn't work at all. So one of the questions you said you wanted to talk about was transparency, and it feels like you were just talking about that, which is when you talked about bad news and negative energy. Um, in a company, how much should you share? Because, for example, some people, many people in a startup, if you said, "Well, if we don't get this contract signed, we're going to run out of money in 2 weeks," might freak out. Even though that's true, uh, sometimes ignorance is bliss. Do you want to say a little bit more about your question? Because I did some thinking about it before the show, and I have some very clear thoughts, but I want to make sure I understand. So when you ask it, what else do you want to know about transparency?
I guess the question really was more in terms of how much is too transparent, and
Yeah.
how little is like or rather how much is too little and how much is too much. uh, right, because I think I've read this. So one of the other companies who I borrow a lot of, at least my people philosophies from, is Netflix, and they have a great article which their chief, which Reed Hastings and their chief people officer once put out several years ago, uh, which also appeared in HBR, which says how Netflix reinvented HR. uh, and they publicly put out their policies on SlideShare, and it became sort of a rage. And one of their things is that they are generally way more transparent to their employees about a lot of things compared to how other companies are. Now, I don't know on the ground how true that is, but at least that's one of their clearly written down principles. Uh, uh, and I sort of lean more towards that piece, to say, given a choice or a tie between should I share this and should I not share this, I'm the one who is more likely to share it with a disclaimer or two versus choose to keep it.
Yes. So I've done some thinking about this, and actually, the fact you bring up another company is a great point. I think a lot of this is about expectation and culture. In other words, I'm guessing in your company, it's only a guess, but let me know. In the past, has there been relatively little transparency?
Yes, in the
Yeah,
past there has been some level of transparency, but it has been relatively lower, and also it has been relatively infrequent.
yeah. So, my number one point is people handle transparency. Um, depending on history, depending on expectation. So with that other company that claims they're transparent a lot, their employee base is going to handle transparency a lot better because they've been conditioned to it. And so the point is, with transparency, you don't start. The wrong time to start a transparency campaign is with a bunch of bad news. You
Right.
have to build the trust by sharing good news and then maybe some bad and then good, but you can't go straight to, okay, we're going to start being transparent and it turns out we have cancer and everybody's going to die. Like, but
Yeah.
don't panic. There's a 2% chance for this new drug. Like, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so, what I would say, I'm going to tell a story in a second about being very transparent with a place I worked. In fact, two places. Well, now that I've teased it, let me share it and then I'll go to my points. So, before I was ever at Amazon or Twitch, I worked at two startups. One of them was called Lightning Cast in Alexandria, Virginia. One of them was called Lightspace in Boston, Massachusetts. Both of them were very challenged startups. And I was at the one when 9/11 happened and the market crashed. And then I was at the other one during that recession. So the point is, at some point, we were out of money. And I actually needed to take my engineering team to lunch, which I did, and tell them, hey, look, the paycheck you just got today is the last one we have money in the bank for. Now, our VCs tell us they're going to give us a bridge loan, that they're going to give us money before the next paychecks are due. But if they don't, and if you come into work Monday and you work up until that paycheck is due, I'm telling you straight up, you may not get paid. And I'm legally required to tell you that you won't get paid until we have money and I can tell you that you will get paid. And that is a obviously super scary message. But because I knew my team well and we had been through a lot, and I went to lunch and I said, look, this is how it is. And we had a culture of transparency. I was then able to share pretty scary news, and we didn't lose anyone. Like, no one went back to their desk after lunch and was like, well, I've got, I'm going to spend from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. getting my resume ready and 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. packing up my stuff on my desk because I'm out of here and I'm not coming back on Monday. Instead, everybody said, well, look, it's only 2 weeks between paychecks. Like, the worst that happens is we don't get paid for 2 weeks, and like, we can gamble with you for 2 weeks. Now, they were mostly young single guys, like mostly engineers. And so, like, taking a flyer for 2 weeks wasn't too hard. But the point of that story is they had the trust. And fast forward to Lightspace. Basically the same thing played out, only there I had to do this twice. And I had to tell my team, we're out of money. We think we'll have money by the next paycheck, but maybe not. And there we did lose one person. She stayed with us the first time, but the second time, she was our receptionist. And she was very honest. She said, I love you guys, but honestly, I can make $8 an hour answering the phone and getting the mail anywhere, and I don't need the stress of maybe running out of money. So I'm going to move on. And I thought that was like a reasonable answer. Like, you're getting paid $8 an hour. You're not that deep into the mission. I'm out of here. So the point for you, Mrugendra, and it seems like, it's tough for you at 8 a.m. because he's in Pune and it's 8 a.m. and he's yawning away. We got to inject a little more good caffeine in you. But I think you have to build that trust bit by bit. So I strongly encourage transparency because it increases loyalty and engagement. But you need to start by sharing business numbers, management changes, hiring practices, basically anything. And I think what you're seeing right now and why you're getting negative energy is just in part, you're sharing more than has been shared and more frequently, and people aren't used to it. So remember, I told you in one of our previous sessions, let your team know what you're going to do. And I think that was about some kind of change you wanted to make or an experiment you wanted to run. You wanted teams to, yeah, you're nodding. So this is the same thing. Tell them, look, I'm going to be more transparent, but bad news will come up. And like, don't freak out. I need you not to freak out if something bad, like, because I can't share with you if I tell you stuff and then I spend the next 3 days managing rumors, negative energy, and people coming into my office needing to be reassured. Like, you kind of put the responsibility to them. I'm expecting you to be an adult, and I'm trusting you to be an adult, but like, I can't keep sharing if you're not adults. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think
So like,
try. Oh, go ahead.
sorry. So my point was, at least for the next 18 months, 12 months to 18 months, I don't see the reason for any bad news. One, it's all going to be good news.
Great.
But then, yeah,
Fantastic.
yeah. How do you share something like something to the tune of a message which says, listen, we wanted to go out and uh, raise X funds by giving away a certain percentage of the company, but we actually believe if we do a few things, we can raise a lot later. We will need to raise a lot less than X, right? But some of the things we have to do for that are natural, which is drive towards a little bit of profitability. But it does not seem to the management, at least, that it is impossible to do, or it's a very harsh step. Like we have to get rid of half of our staff, or it's not a desperation driven need. It is more a genuine thing which we should be doing, because if we do it and we're able to drive towards profitability, then it pays off in terms of a lot better valuation, so on and so forth. So how do you take a message like that and give it in the right way? Because the bigger challenge with a message like that is, oh, what the f, half the people are going to lose their job.
Well, fair point, right? Thank you for. Uh, so this is a piece of psychology that I guess if we had a psychologist here, which I don't think we do tonight, they could probably explain. People are way better at envisioning the worst than the best. Like
Right.
the whole glass half empty, glass half full. When it comes to anything about work, people are incredibly good. Like, not only is the glass, 3/4 empty, it's also dirty and cracked. Um, and you really have to push people on that, I think. But I would try and dribble that news out. In other words, I would not try to give that like all in one, all hands or all in one message. I would try to like warm people up to it. Um, I would bring it out in pieces and in very manageable chunks. There's this idea. I don't know if it's in Switch, but there's an idea in change management called dialing the heat up and down. And basically, when people aren't changing, you've got to make it a little more uncomfortable and urgent so they will change. But if you make it too uncomfortable and urgent, they start to freak out and resist. The same is true here. You need to measure how much they can take in and give them that much and then stop. And if they start to freak out a little, uh, dial it back and wait, or do a little more explaining. And so a couple examples here. Number one, you can ask people some questions, like small groups, like, hey, what do you guys know about our funding strategy? Or what do you think about our potential to, what would be your appetite to push a little harder to get closer to profitability so that we, the employees, keep higher ownership? And you make it more questions than telling. And when they tell you what they're thinking, there's two things there. When other people tell you what they're thinking, they get bought into the answer. Because if they say, oh, yeah, we'd really like to push for it, and there's like a group discussion a little bit, or leader employees, not higher level, not apex employees, not people at the top, but like the thought leaders and the loud voices are saying, "Oh yeah, that sounds good," then the audience starts to own it. And so the key here is, I know my style and probably your style is to figure we're the manager, we need to tell, we need to share, and it's on us to do the communicating. But actually, it's not. You don't have to be the main communicator. You can ask leading questions and lead a discussion, and that's way more inclusive. Now, it does take a little more time. But again, leading people can't be rushed. Like, we all wish we had these perfect people that you could tell them anything and they would make the right decisions and work hard. Like, um,
Yeah.
you're reading Switch, so much of leading is about managing people's emotions. And there was a show we did not too long ago about basically people are driven by their fears and pain. Um, that's when they behave irrationally. And so they get afraid. And so what I would say is the reason, for example, I was able to tell those groups of employees, we don't have any money, but you should still keep working for us and it'll all work out. I know you have like 90 or 100 people. Is that right that you're talking to
Yeah.
normally?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was handling 10 at that point. So you can have a personal relationship with each of 10 people and sit at a big lunch table and like talk it over. For some of these messages, you can't quite do that, but you can have more of a town hall and less of like a lecture hall. And you can talk to a few people in the break room and like pioneer your messages with them,
Got
um,
it.
before you try and, if you want to give a message and see how people are going to react, I would pilot my message with a few people and then you can tune it, see what their questions are. And remember, if you talk to 6 people over lunch once, probably those 6 people have 80% of the questions, particularly if you pick people who are well connected.
Mhm.
So, does that answer your questions about transparency?
Yeah, I think we can move on.
Okay. So you had 2 other questions. We'll switch to one the geeks in the channel will like. We often have a lot of software engineers here. You asked me about speed of delivery versus tech debt. Is that a good place to go?
Yes.
All right. So you're obviously, from what you wrote me, you're wrestling with the question, how do you balance how much tech debt to accumulate versus how fast to ship, right? And I would say a startup is different than like Kristen's here. She's working for a somewhat startup company, but one that's a little bigger and more stable. There are some differences. Um, so I have a few opinions here. Um, the first thing I will say that's just true is at a startup, speed versus tech debt um, leans towards speed. Because in the end, if you ship a good product with a lot of tech debt, you'll have money and customers, and you can try the horrible scramble to dig out of that problem. But if you ship too late with low tech debt and a beautiful product, you'll be bankrupt. And so you have to no, I mean that's the trade-off, right? So the first
Yeah.
thing I would say is at a startup, you lean towards scrappy and messy. Um, is my high level advice. But now I have some things that will help you a little more. And the first thing I would say is, well, obviously, what I want to tell you first is, oh, see, wouldn't you like to know there are these magic solutions where you don't have to make this trade off? You can have everything you want. That would be like, oh, thank you, Ethan. That's the coaching I was looking for.
I wouldn't ask the question if such magic solutions existed in the
Well,
world.
but there is something that approximates it a little bit, which
Okay.
is you must remember this from working for me at Amazon, sadly. How much software did we build that never got used or that turned out to be fairly useless compared to what we imagined? Would you say some, a fair amount, none?
Very little, I would say.
Interesting. Because uh so apparently I'm really good at this. Woo. Um no, the point is actually I can explain why that was. What software did you see us build in your job there? What were you the customer of? What were we building?
Ingestion.
Yeah, ingestion, but specifically, the point I'm not going to play 20 questions to get you there. Your team did things manually and then we automated it, right?
Yeah.
So, for anybody who doesn't know, when Mrugendra worked for me, he managed several hundred people and they started out doing very manual work. And over time, we looked at like what was taking up all the time and we automated that work away. Well, this goes to my point about how you avoid somewhat the speed versus tech debt trade off. Specifically, we knew what to build for you because we could see it in action. And so we already knew what you were doing and we knew what needed to be changed. Like we had a perfect laboratory. Going to the point for you, what before you make this horrible speed versus tech debt trade off, which you will have to make, what can you test? The best thing you can do, if you can, is try to trial your software. You can do it through design thinking. You can do it on paper. You can do it manually. You can do it with all kinds of prototypes. The point I'm really getting at is what can you do to avoid building a lot before you know what to build? And the reason that matters is you don't have to waste that effort then. And so it reduces any effort saved, lets you get out of jail on speed versus tech debt. So the thing I would recommend to you is first, can you test some of this, including paper tests, human tests, whatever? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, second thing, you may remember from Amazon, we had this concept of one-way doors versus two-way doors. Is this
Yeah.
reversible? So for those who don't know, Amazon has this concept, which Mrugendra remembers, which is some things are a two-way door. If you go and do them, you can pretty easily undo them. And some things, once you do them, you're really stuck with them. So the best example of this is lowering price. Let's say I had started this channel and said only subscribers can chat. And so if you want to participate in our community, everybody's going to have to pony up $5. And, that's how it's going to be. And we built a community and some people subscribed and some people had to stay silent, but whatever. You can lower that price. You can always come back and say, good news, I'm making chat free. But what I couldn't do very easily is once I've advertised my channel, because if you go to my webpage and other places, it says telling you what you need to improve your career for free. If I came and said, oh, it's been free, we've been doing it a year, but now everybody has to pay, there would be rebellion and chaos. So the point is, you can lower price, but you can't raise it. And so it's like a one-way door. Where this matters in your question of speed versus tech debt, Mrugendra, is know what type of tech debt you're making. Is it stuff you can clean up, or is it stuff that's like architecture or deep in your system assumptions? And so basically, it's okay to make a pile of tech debt that won't require you to like throw away your product and start over. It's bad to make tech debt that's going to be very heavy. And so my point is all tech debt's not created equal. And I can't get deeper into that without knowing your architecture, but it's really important. It's one thing to go fast and like leave a bunch of loose ends, corner cases or whatever. Like it's very different, for example, this is important. It's very different to leave second priority features not implemented. No logging, for example. That's a bad practice. But you can go add logging than it is to build something in a hack. Like, oh, we're going to store all the data in flat files that get deleted. Well, then there's no way to get it back. Um, and so it's what kind of tech debt are you making, and what's the cost to fix it? The last thing I would say, and this is my last piece of advice on this, you can ask me any other questions you have on it. Obviously, can you modularize? The more modular your software, the more, if something has tech debt, you can rip it out and replace it. So those are my main arguments. Coming back to speed versus tech debt, most startups do what it takes to survive, and so they favor speed. And pretty much every startup, for example, Amazon has ever required, has then acquired, has then stalled because the first thing they want to do once they feel they've made it and they've been bought is spend a year cleaning up their mess. So that's just like, no, I'm being like dead honest, right? That's what happens is they're like, oh, now we're part of Amazon, we have the money. Hey, we're gonna need like a year to re-architect. And of course we're very unhappy, but we've learned this is true. So what questions do you have about that?
Right. I think I'm generally clear in terms of there is a map, or a mental map that I get out of this. I think a lot of this is coming because what has ended up happening, to give you some context, is that we kind of it's again a good story. We tripled our customer base in the last 18 months, and we sort of hit the beginning point of the hockey stick, right when sooner than we expected. And then the given we are in the cloud, the version we had, or what product we had, was never it's not really technical debt, because it was never built or designed with that kind of growth in mind. Uh, and as we try to rip it out and do something different, knowing fully that we are now probably going to support 10x the customers over the next couple of years than what we started out with. One of the things which gives me the jitters is, are we doing it right? Or when we hit 10x, are we going to have to rip it out again to support 20x or 30x?
Yeah, well, a system that scales 10x is generally pretty good. Like, um, I don't know what kind of scaling you're really expecting, but the problem is, unless you're super clever, building for more than one order of magnitude means you're building all this extra cost or complexity
Yeah. True.
that so there are all of these things are rules of thumb, but there look, this is a good topic, a meta topic. There are way more ways to screw up your startup than there are to make it work. Like, that's just the nature of startups and businesses.
Yeah.
And one of them is building for shit you'll never need. And so I think if you ask me the question, would I rather just build for 10x and deal with it when I get there, or try and build for 50x and maybe find out that it's going to take us 3 years, and all these other features I could have built to get to 5x? Everyone wants to be optimistic, but you have to like control your optimism a little bit. So my advice again is simplify, because 80% of features you build are never used. It's Pareto principle, like everything else, right? It's 80-20, 20% of your features, 20% of your functionality. And that's kind of why I said test. Try and figure out any way you can to figure out what 20% of your stuff is really going to scale and in your business, because engineers love to build for theoretical futures, at least because it's fun. It's like complex code, and I get to pull in all these. It's where engineers start driving you nuts, because they start talking about, well, I need to learn this new language and we need a Hadoop cluster. And engineers talking about how a new technology is going to be required might be true, but it also might be they really want to learn that technology. And it seems a lot more fun than working on what they're working on.
It's just super sexy.
Yeah. And people can't be blamed for that. Like, it's way more entertaining. But your job as a leader is to tell them, let's not do that yet. Where what you secretly mean is never. Um, like, but um, so and there's some people in chat saying they love to over engineer because it's fun. It's fun to imagine all the things that might happen. Um, yeah. So yeah, I was telling a story at work. I won't go through it all, but basically, engineers love really. We had a problem. Something went wrong at work. I think I was telling it on my stream a couple nights ago, and a big system at Amazon went down. And engineers love elegant solutions. And when this system was down, and we called the AWS principal engineers who run the Amazon Web Service compute cloud, and they're like, you know what we're gonna do? We're just gonna like use thousands of machines and brute force it. And so, like, the best engineers Amazon has, the ones who designed EC2 and a couple of our other big pieces of infrastructure, were like, yeah, we could overthink this, or we could just throw like a couple hundred instances at it and be done by tomorrow. And so it was really funny. They were like cave troll engineers with this huge club. Like, we're just going to beat this into submission. Uh, so I talked a lot there, and I know that. Build for reasonable scale and move on. Like, agility is more your friend than thinking ahead. Real in a startup, like, and that's another thing to culturalize or customize your team to. It goes with the transparency, telling them, look, agility is more our friend than consistency. Like being able to pivot quickly and accept change. Um, uh, Yeah, here's another Duke of Thought in chat says, I often over engineer because making things super efficient just feels so good. Exactly. And you're the problem. We love you, but you're the problem. um, so, what do I want to say about this? With scale, uh, you want to accustom people to the idea of change. There's a great quote I've just heard I want to share, maybe in the last 6 months, which is the only sustainable advantage a company can have in the modern day is the ability to learn faster than its competitors. And I think that includes changing, like learning is about changing behavior or changing market conditions. The point is, the only sustainable advantage is, can I outlearn the people I'm competing with? Can my company learn and adapt faster? Because if you look at it the reverse, no matter what your company does, no matter how big its lead is, matter how big its market power, if that company is learning slower than its competitors, it's doomed.
Yeah.
It may take 20 years.
It just buys you more time.
Yeah. So,
That's
whereas
all.
if you're learning faster, yeah. Sorry, you were saying?
No, I was saying the size of the lead you have just
Buys you
buys
more
you
time.
more.
Right, more
Yeah,
runway.
thing.
So, a lot of what I'm talking about here is you're definitely part in the process and leadership business, but what I'm really hearing from you is you are very much in the culture business. Meaning your job is very much guiding the culture, and that's trust and communication. Trust and communication. Build trust, communicate. Ask questions. This is really, I kind of am enjoying, like you can see I'm smiling at you. I kind of am enjoying imagining you in this role because it's right back to the girl in the birthday dress. Like, it's trust
Yeah.
and communication. Uh, um, People who don't know this story, go watch the first interview we did with Mrugendra. I
Yeah.
retold a story of his early career at Amazon about a girl crying because no one noticed her new dress. Um, uh, and so, all right, the last thing you brought up was you said, I'm going to read this. Hang on. You said when you're hiring a lot of mid level employees, how do you integrate engineers into the team better? It is easier to integrate managers or program managers who work across functions and have interactions with several other employees as part of their daily routine. But engineers are typically very focused on their own piece and have little to limited cross team interaction, more so in a small firm. So first, we have a lot of engineers here. I wonder if they agree. But second, I don't find this. So I'm curious. Tell me a little more. Why do you have any idea why you're seeing that? Because I would say generally I don't think that's typical. So is there something special about your environment or unusual? Did you see that in
No.
Amazon, for example?
Uh, so what I meant is, let me rephrase that question, right?
Okay.
An engineering, a typical mid-level engineering role, uh, uh, where you are hiring a senior developer, but
Yep.
let's say you have very few, if any, principals
Yeah.
in the company, partly because you're not a company that needs 100 principals any which ways.
Yep.
The scale you are at, uh, there is nobody who really can sort of technically deeply mentor and coach them,
Okay.
or give them advice. Not too many people. And B, a typical engineering role in our place is not does not involve as much cross functional development, or creating hooks and APIs and stuff, or talking to five other teams about when their stuff and dependencies will be ready for your piece to sort of start getting hooked into and function as it should, uh, purely because we are not that big and complex. So you largely, for your piece of work, would control your own destiny and would control how things are going to pan out for you, right? At best, you're talking to two other people. What that does is, when you're an engineer who is coming in, you know what your piece of work is, and you know what your manager is, and you know the four or five other people you are going to work with as a part of that module in the software. But you really don't have a business need to go talk to people in other modules or people on other products,
Okay.
unlike a place like Amazon, where there is a lot of cross functional and cross team technical dependencies that you are dealing with, and hence you have a lot more communication. And I think one of the best ways that you integrate into an environment is just learning and talking to a lot of people. And for a lot of people, depending on your personality, a lot of that is driven by purely a need versus need to go and communicate and chat up and talk because you have dependencies, versus a more inner motivation or a desire to go and socialize and talk.
Okay.
Does
So
that give you more context?
it does. Thank you. So I have a list of maybe ideas to try. Kristen, by the way, I remember you talking about lean coffee. Go ahead and explain that briefly in chat, and I'll relay it. Basically, one way is to have a quick social stand up around coffee where everyone talks about what they give a brief they give a brief summary, I think, of their day or personal stuff. They may not even be allowed to talk about work, but it's just like a quick way to share. It's a quick way to drive interaction. Now, engineers who may be introverts may not love this. Um, there was an idea, and we have a gentleman from Sweden. I haven't seen him here in chat tonight, but we can talk to him in Discord. The Swedish culture actually has a special name for a social coffee like this. Yeah, so Kristen says lean coffee is an agendaless meeting. You don't vote on what you want to talk about. Anyone can add an idea to a post-it to discuss. So it's just a little bit of a way to like give people a chance to interact. But for developers specifically, I would consider these tools. Pair programming. So you could go to a pair programming style. Some engineers like it, some don't, but you could at least encourage it. You know what pair programming is?
Yeah.
Two people, one keyboard. So that's one thing you could do. Design reviews is the classic way. If you have you're basically describing senior engineers. You get them together. You pump them up their egos, honestly, and you tell them You three or you five are our most senior engineers, and I want you to form a design and architecture board to advise me and to review the designs of other groups. And then you bring them together to advise you, and you bring them together to review the designs in different areas, and they'll end up working together because uh, we were talking about efficiency and programming for scale, but I've got the other engineers here in the channel. Be honest. Which of you doesn't love getting to review the designs of others? This is like irresistible bait for more senior engineers because it's like, you mean all I have to do is show up and criticize other people? This is fantastic. Um, uh, yeah, so I think it's like the most clickbait you can give an engineer, and they'll come running to it. Now you have to control it, make it valuable so it doesn't actually end up what I just described, which is like Shark Tank for your junior engineers. But honestly, design reviews are a well understood process. Another one is on call rotation or ops stuff. Uh, Senior engineers, you can have them be more social by putting them on call or bringing them together a little bit. Um, uh, on call is not a great way to do it, but anything that forces togetherness around a business need is my point.
Okay.
And then the other two is the classic like lunches. You can always get people to be more social by buying them food. So if this is a problem, take them with who you want them to meet. Or even if you can't scale, sorry, let me take a step back. A lot of companies in India provide free food all the time. Are you already doing that?
We do already.
All right. But still, then people get sick of the food inside the place and they want to go out because they complain about the food you're bringing in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want these engineers to get to know each other or to know others, you tell them that you will pay for their lunches once a week and they can go out wherever they want. And then they'll go out. And once they're at lunch together, they can't help but talk because no matter how antisocial they are, right? Like how many people are we talking about here? 3, 4, 6, 10? Like what's the population?
Somewhere between 10 and 20.
Yeah, so you break them up into a few groups or whatever, and you send them to lunch on your bill, and they it's a privilege. Like, hey, you're the senior engineers, and just because you don't even have to tell them what you're doing. Yeah, Perpetual White Belt says my company does this. I always wondered why. Perpetual White Belt, you might be outing yourself in a way. Um, uh, you basically just bribe. You don't even have to tell them what you're doing. It you can make it like all this praise about how great they are and send them out. So awesome. That'll work really well. And then the last way is brown bags. Engineers also love the chance to showcase their knowledge, and they almost all engineers are curious. And so you do like the senior engineer brown bag, and you tell them, oh, once a month or once every 2 weeks, I want one of you to present to the other engineers about your area of expertise. Those are great words, right? And
Yeah.
what engineer doesn't want to get up and talk about his area of expertise? Uh, like, I want to be careful here, by the way, because all the suggestions I've given you, like, will pump up egos. So you want to use them a little bit carefully.
I was about to say the same.
Yeah.
What you're basically telling me um, is essentially turn the keys on their egos.
Well,
Solved
I'm
all of
saying that's one set of techniques if you don't have better. Um, but you can channel. Okay, so earlier you wanted to re-nuance your question. I will re-nuance my answer. Um, you want to channel their professional pride to valuable outcomes. You
it.
can
Okay.
avoid it being egotistical by how you frame it, but you can channel professional pride. And
Yeah.
engineers are craftspeople, they are proud of their work. And so, as opposed to it being pure ego, you tap into that pride of craftsmanship. And that's the way to do it without it being purely ego. You can also do it through ego. So sweet. Chat, do you have any questions you want Mrugendra and I to cover that we haven't? Mrugendra, we've hit your top questions. Do you have anything else you want to cover while we're talking?
No, I think this those were the questions I had, and we kind of got through.
Okay. Well, when do we all get shares in your company, and like when's the big IPO?
IPO is probably several years away.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we're expecting great things, is my point. So, uh,
Yeah.
several years. That doesn't sound like a super aggressive plan. Um, so, but anyway, no, I get it. Very nice. Said there's somebody in chat who said they love the resume review. We did a big resume review on another channel where I partner with a guy named Devin Nash, and we reviewed people's resumes. Um, Let me just say, Devin and I are cooking up a new show for 2 weekends from now on November 9th, where we're probably going to do live on stream interviews. And we're going to do it game show style. So people who come on get to answer interview questions until they screw one up or something like that. And so, just like we did the resume review, we're now going to do live interview training with the two of us on Saturday the 9th. Meanwhile, my next show will be Friday the 8th. And actually, Kristen, who's been here in chat the whole time, she has reason to come to Seattle because she has family here. And so, for the first time, she's going to be live in Seattle. We'll be in Awesome Dave's studio with the two of us side by side. And we'll actually do her next coaching session the night before the live interview rounds in person. So we have a couple great shows coming up, and I'm really looking forward to it. And with that, we've had a good quick talk with Mrugendra. We don't do a long show for coaching hours. So, Mrugendra, we'll catch up next time you want to talk.
Mhm.
It is holiday season, so we'll see when it is. For everyone else, I sure hope you come join Kristen and I on the 8th. And then on the 9th, you can come to either my channel or Devin Nash. We're gonna host. I'll host his channel for that. And so wherever you come, you'll find both of us doing live interviews with viewers. All right, sweet. Mrugendra, thank you very much. I'll say goodnight and goodbye to you. Um,
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye. And we'll flip over here real quick um, to just me. So, hey, everybody, that was fun. I love it when you come here, and it was good to have a good audience tonight. Mugendra's got tough questions that I think apply to everyone. It's interesting since a lot of you are earlier in your career to get the chance to see people who are struggling with leadership. And the one thing I would say is it's easy to think, why is my manager or my director or whatever such an idiot? Why doesn't he or she get it? Realize a lot of times the manager is trying really hard. They're human like you, and they're trying to figure it out and do the right thing. But that's really like not always all that easy. Um, so and so with that, I will leave you all for tonight and say cheers. It's been super pleasure talking to you. And I will see you on the 8th for Kristen and the 9th for interviews with Devin. And thank you all for being here. Good night.